introduce to you what I do first of all, a little bit of history, and I'd like it to be fairly informal, so I'd like you to be able to ask me questions. I know some of you are first years, so maybe you've still got a hangover from Freshers Week, I don't know, or maybe you're in the full swing of studying already, and then some of you are second years, so you're probably a bit more heads into the books maybe, I don't know. So I am a racing driver, as you know already. I'm also a motoring journalist, so I write for The Telegraph and a few other titles as well. I present I Want That Car on ITV4, which is being aired in the UK and Australia at the moment. And I also have a used car sales business, which I scratch built in 2007. I set it up with £300 and a Vauxhall Cavalier, which at the time was only worth about £400 itself. And I kept on reinvesting the money and working really, really hard, and now it turns over £1 million a year, and I sell BMWs, Mercedes, Audis, Bentleys, etc. So whether it's writing about them, racing them, working on them, talking about them, or selling them, cars are my bag. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background as to how I got to where I am now, and hopefully it will inspire you along the way, or you may be able to identify with some of my stories. So we'll start when I was a baby. My father was racing in the Birkett 6-hour relay race, which is a relay race that takes place at Silverstone, for those that are not familiar with it. And back then, in the 80s, it was invitation only, so you had to be pretty handy behind the wheel. I was in my pram, and my mum was pushing me around, and the only thing I stared for was a V8. Everything else I just slept right through, so cars were my comfort zone at a pretty early age. Moving forward a few years, my father is a precision engineer, and he used to work on cars in the garage, maintain classic cars, build kit cars, scratch-built chassis, that kind of thing. And I was the wire brush girl. And so we got through lots of bottles of white spirit, and I was a helper. Then I learnt how to drive when I was 16. I was fortunate enough to have friends that had a lot of private land, and so I was able to drive a Mini off-road before I was actually allowed to drive on the road. So by the time it got to my 17th birthday, I did my theory and my practical, and I passed within 2 months. And so I was sort of bitten by the car bug fairly early on. My dad said to me when I went off to university, buy a Haynes manual. So it was no longer me working on my car with my dad's assistance, it was you're off on your own now. And I can remember I was at Bath University changing a fuel pump on a Nissan Sunny, and there were some boys playing rugby, and they said, oh look, there's a bird over there working on a car. So I'm quite shocked. But over the years it's become more acceptable, I think, and more expected to see more women in motorsport, although driver-wise, we are still in a minority. Only 2% of racing drivers are female. And I have been lucky enough to meet Lena on the Audi LMP1 team, but again, it's quite a low percentage. So, studied business at university, and when I graduated, I had this passion for cars, but I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. So initially I worked as a promo girl, I worked for British Airways as cabin crew, and then in my spare time and in my fun time I did track days, auto tests, grass track racing. So I'd shoot off down to Devon and take part in grass track racing. We had a 205 GTI that we used for that. It was a bit of a banger, I must admit, but we had a really good time, and that's where you start with motorsport. There's multi-million-pound budgets, and there's right down at the other end, you can go and enter an auto solo for 40 quid in a car that costs £500 and still have fun, and the degrees of everything else in between. So I started with that, really, and every time I went out I thought I could have done better, and I thought I could have been faster, but I kept winning prizes, and I thought I could have done better. I was sort of beating myself up. but I definitely couldn't afford to go motor racing then. So when I was working as cabin crew for British Airways, I bought and sold a few cars on the side, and my first profit margin was £65, and it was a Nissan Primera that I bought from Shoreham Vehicle Auction. We had a bit of a joke that we would buy Shoreham Shonkers. But there was a margin in them, and the margins increased, and it got to the point where I was making more money per car sale in profit than I was in a whole week at British Airways. So I thought, right, I'll get rid of that. This is my business. I've combined my business degree and my passion for cars. So that's when RJ Internet Showroom was launched. So I set up RJ Internet Showroom, and I got to a point where I had turned my sort of small pile of money into a slightly bigger pile of money. And I went out and did my race licence in 2011 in the February. So I entered a competition with SEAT, and it was basically boys against girls. So a selection of girls and a selection of boys were in a position where SEAT sponsored their race licence. So I did my race licence at Silverstone, which was quite key because that's obviously the first circuit that I was at when I was a baby. So after I did my race licence in February, in the March, I went out and bought a 35-year-old Porsche 924. So 2 litre, naturally aspirated, engine at the front, rear-wheel drive, gearbox at the back, really good weight distribution there, and a great car to start learning to go racing. Now, I didn't have an awful lot of experience with rear-wheel drive, actually. Obviously, the 205 is front-wheel drive, and a lot of the cars I'd owned, Cavalier SRI, that was also front-wheel drive. See, I'm really classy here, you can tell by all the cars. I had a Subaru as well, yes. And so I bought the 924, I bought it in the March, and in the April, I did the test day on the Friday, and in true motorsport ways, it can go wrong, and it very often does go wrong. My car broke down after 15 minutes. When I say my car broke down after 15 minutes, I didn't really help matters, because I changed down mid-corner, didn't heel and toe, and I spun. And that was a lesson that I learnt straight away, because we were testing with cars that had more than double the horsepower. The 924 only had 129 brake. So I'm stopped in the middle of the circuit, can't get the car going again, and there's cars zooming past me, and I'm thinking, come on, start again. Anyway, eventually got the car started, brought it into the pits, and I was gutted. I said, oh, I'm not going to be able to race tomorrow because it's broken down, it wouldn't restart. Thankfully, they managed to get it restarted so I could race it the next day on the Saturday, after having only done 15 minutes and very little experience with rear-wheel drive. Now, who would be that silly or brave? So I went out, and the very first race, I decided to let everybody go. All I wanted was my signature. So I let everybody go, and then I just sort of drove around the track and enjoyed myself. And then the guy that I bought the car from was racing with me, and his team were running me as well. And he said, oh, you and me, Rebecca, we'll always be at the back of the grid. And I thought, well, speak for yourself. I was really quite taken aback with that. He'd done 2 or 3 seasons by that point, and this was my first ever race. So, in my second race, which was on the same race weekend, I thought, right, you're having it, Mr. Bravo. And we had a good old battle the whole way through the race, and I thought, wow, this is pretty something, you know? This is the first time driving the car, and I'm battling with someone that's done 2 or 3 seasons. But again, I didn't know if I would be that competitive. I knew I was quick on track days, but to be competitive in racing takes that extra level. So I spent most of the season learning the car and completing my races, completing my signatures. I do remember one point where I did have an off, and I didn't complete enough of the race to get my signature. And I went to race control, and I said, I'm sure that I've completed most of my race. Can I please still have my signature? He said, no, you haven't completed enough of the race. You know what clerks of the courses can be like. Some of them are really pleasant, and some of them do like to exert their authority. And I said, but but please can I just have my signature? He said, no, motorsport's tough. Why don't you take up knitting or something? So, head down like this, you know, I left the clerk of the course. I can't believe he said that to me. Eventually, I did collect enough signatures. I missed car problems, you know, breaking down, a 35-year-old car, expecting it to be abused around the circuit, and a few offs with it being my first season. I managed to collect enough signatures, and then I lost the cross on the back of my car. And I learnt also how to drive in the wet, because the wet is not very forgiving. You have to be very, very smooth, and you can't afford to go too fast because then you end up falling off the circuit. So I was 5 seconds a lap quicker than the person at the back of the grid in the wet, but I was still finishing at the back of the grid. So I thought, right, okay, I've got to do something about this. Maybe if I'm 4.5 seconds, if I'm a second slower, then maybe I can still beat him and not be at the back of the grid. So that's what I did. I reined it in a little bit, and I ended up getting the title of Rain Queen. So from someone who's spinning off every 5 minutes in the wet to someone who absolutely loves the rain, and I really love the rain now. On Saturday, it was torrential rain. I was in this smart car, and it was my first time ever driving a smart car on circuit. And they've got a very short wheelbase, as you know, so they're very twitchy, they can be very snappy, there's no dramatic lifts. And I qualified in pole. So yeah, I like the rain now, but it took some learning. So if we rewind back to the first season. By the end of the first season, I was 0.6 of a second off the race leader, who'd then gone on to win the championship. So I thought, right, let's take this a little bit more seriously now. So I improved the stickers on the car. I'm afraid that's all I had at that moment in time. So the second season was in the 924. I got 5 podiums and a race win. So I thought, right, we're really going to step it up a gear now. So I launched Project Le Mans, which is my 4-year plan to competing at what I think is the most prestigious 24-hour endurance race in the world. And I decided that I needed a prettier car, because as much as I loved my 924, they are rather boxy and sponsors don't particularly like the shape. So I thought, okay, what looks pretty, what has years of motorsport pedigree to back it up, and what's reasonably affordable? And I came up with the Boxster. So I say it's the intelligent man's Porsche, not the poor man's Porsche. So I approached some sponsors and I said, listen, I've got Project Le Mans on the go. I had 5 podiums last year, including a race win, and my car's pretty. And the reason why I wanted to stick with Porsche is because I'd started in a Porsche. I wanted to get to Le Mans, and Porsche have won Le Mans more times than any other manufacturer. Still, you know, I know that Audi are doing very well, but Porsche are still in the lead. They've won it 16 times, and they are the only GT car to have won Le Mans outright in 1979 with their Porsche 911. And in 1948, when the company was very, very young and they had no money, it was a fledgling company, they had a prototype 356, which was actually mid-engined. But for a number of reasons, and when it went into production, it had to be rear-engined. And they had 3 of the lightweight bodies, prototypes, not mid-engined, but 3 of the lightweight bodies left. So they used 2 in testing, because they decided that if they entered Le Mans with their sports cars and they were successful at Le Mans, they would sell sports cars. And they took a big risk because they had no money. So they took 2 cars testing, they smashed up 1 car, which was no way, it was beyond repair. And the other car they damaged, and they took the massive, massive gamble to turn that 3rd car into a racing car. And it paid off, because now today, look how successful Porsche is after taking so many risks. And they've been working with Volkswagen for years, we all know that. So to say that the 924 has a van engine in it and the Boxster is, you know, whatever, people like to make their jibes. But Volkswagen and Porsche have been working together since the 40s. So yeah, the Boxster was the answer to my problems. And it proved a smart choice, actually, because the sponsors liked it, and it was also incredibly reliable. The 924 wasn't so reliable. As fun as it was to drive, it wasn't so reliable. And one race meeting at Rockingham, we were told off for not having enough cars in Parc Ferme, and I said that's because we were all on axle stands, and I wasn't joking. Everybody laughed, but I wasn't joking. We literally had all broken down. So yes, last year, first year of Project Le Mans. This year is the second year of Project Le Mans. So what did I do last year with the Boxster? Well, I won the BRSCC Production Boxster Championship. And then this season we decided we wanted to do longer races in line with the project and also test some faster cars. So along the way, we've had a fourth was our first result for this season, then a third, then a second after qualifying in pole. And unfortunately, the last 3 rounds have been fairly disastrous. So although our pace has been improving as the season's gone on, there's over 30 cars on the grid, and there's Class A, B and C. I'm in Class B, it's done on power to weight ratio. And at the beginning of the season, we had loads of Class A's in front of us. By the end of the season, in qualifying, we only had 2 Class A's in front of us. So we were looking at a top 3 overall. And unfortunately, we had a DNF at Rockingham, which was the first in 2 seasons, and that was because of some lambda sensor wiring sending a short to the ECU. The second one, we had a racing incident at Silverstone, which the driver came up to me afterwards and said, oh, we had an incident there. I said, yes, we did. Now, bearing in mind, I'm normally a very smiley, happy, positive person. I wasn't so much in this instance. And I said to him, would you like to see the in-car footage? And he said, oh, no, it's all right, I don't need to see that. I said, oh, no, have a look, do have a look. And so he did, he saw the footage, and he said, oh, I think I owe you an apology. I said, yeah, you do. So that was that race. We had to come into the pits and fix the bumper and the wing and just trying to move it off the tyre so that I could go back out again. We were 3 minutes in the pits. When we went back out, we dropped down to 25th out of over 30 cars. And all I could do was pedal the hell out of this car. I mean, honestly, the red mist, you just... we managed to get up to 6th in class and 10th overall with second fastest lap. So we were quite chuffed about that, but as a driver I wanted to be on the podium, so I was quite frustrated. And the next outing was this Saturday just gone, and there was another incident, but this time it genuinely was a racing incident. And that's the difficulty with motorsport, is sometimes it goes wrong, and you put so much effort into it. It's not just about turning up on the day and driving the car. It's the weeks and weeks and weeks of preparation. It's the development into the car. It's the development into the driver, bonding as the team, managing the media, managing the sponsors, making sure the car is repaired if any damage has occurred. But I've been very fortunate to spend time at every level and test lots of different cars as well. I've driven a British touring car, a Toyota Avensis that Tom Ingram is peddling this year. He's the former Ginetta champion. I drove that around Brands Hatch. I've driven a GT3 spec Nissan GTR around Donington. I've driven all sorts of cars. I've raced a Morgan twice now, raced it at Silverstone, and that's such a unique experience because some of the technology is 1920s. But some of it is modern. You know, it has an ECU now, it's got a BMW engine, and you've got this mixture of technologies, old and new, and it's fascinating and really interesting to see how cars are so different and what their similarities are as well. So I've got lots of stories to tell you, and I'm hoping that you'll have some questions that I can pull on these different stories and answer them for you. So the plans now, I mean, as you can see, I managed to get Turtle Wax as a title sponsor, and it's not been easy. Nobody just knocks on your door and says, hey, here's 10 grand, here's 20 grand, here's 50 grand, go motor racing. That doesn't happen. Maybe it did in the halcyon days when there was lots of cash flashing around. And it's no good just ringing up and going, I'm a girly racer, will you sponsor me? Well, are you quick? You know, they want to know that you can actually drive that car and you can get it on the podium and you can get the car into media publications I've got the Telegraph supporting my Project Le Mans. I got Project Le Mans into the Sun newspaper by chatting them up on Twitter. The Sunday Times approached me and asked me to do some writing for them. And so really it's this sort of juggling act of the media, the sponsors, and the actual racing. The actual racing element of itself is actually quite a small percentage of the whole picture. And none of it would have been possible if I hadn't set up my used car sales business and worked hard so that I could initially go out and buy that 924. So when I wanted to convert it into a race car, originally, the Boxster, I went to Autosport. And if you've been to Autosport, you know how huge it is and how many different championships are on display and how many people there are there. And I saw a side to Autosport that I'd never seen before. And it's where all the deals are done. It's where they organise who's running what, who's filming this championship, who's filming that championship, where the ambulances are coming from, where the commentators are coming from, who's going to supply the suspension for my car, who's going to be the tyre supplier. And all these deals are happening. On the Thursday and the Friday, so many deals happen. I secured £10,000 worth of sponsored parts at Autosport to turn my Boxster from a road-going Boxster into a production spec race car. And then to turn it in from the production spec into what it is now, again, Autosport is invaluable. It kickstarts the motorsport calendar, there's everybody there to do the deals, and you get to say hello to former competitors and other people that you know in the motorsport fraternity. So it's a form of networking as well. And it's almost essential that anybody working in motorsport actually goes to this event. And I think I've said enough about that show, because they should be paying me to say all that, and they're not. So, but it hasn't been easy along the way. I know I've already said that, and I've worked really, really hard and long hours, and writing content for my website at 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, getting up again at 7:30, on the laptop again at 8 o'clock, ringing companies at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, whatever, plus running my business. It's been intense. But I've not always been able to do this, because I actually had a really bad car accident on the road. And I'd already set up my business, and it was before I'd started racing. I was in a taxi crash in 2008, and I'd been on a night out in Brighton, and it was New Year's Eve, and it's really irresponsible to walk home, so I got a taxi. That's the right thing to do, isn't it? And my taxi managed to crash into the only other vehicle on the road. What a clever man. And unfortunately it flipped my car around, the car that I was in, that I was a passenger in, and whilst the seatbelt saved my life, it broke my collarbone in half. And at first I didn't realise the damage that had occurred, because you have this thing called adrenaline, and it's so powerful. I actually opened the car door. After doing that, I collapsed on the road. And the first people on the scene were the fire brigade. So they turned up, and I said, "Oh, it's just muscular, I'll be fine. And any time anyone came near, "No, go away. And yeah, it was a pretty bad break. And it took me 3 years to recover, and a total downtime of 18 months. I had a bone graft on my hip, so they cut my stomach muscles. You're all blokes, so you're not going to be squeamish here, okay? Cut my stomach muscles, cut my leg muscles, lifted up, cut the hip bone open, took out the gooey stuff, put it all back together again, and chucked this up there. And in true engineering terms, I had a plate across here with several screws and a screw across where the brake was. And I had to be like this for 2 months. And then a year later, I had to have the metalwork removed. And then sometime after that, a nerve had gotten stuck in the scar tissue. So they had to cut me open again, cut the nerve in half and reposition it. So it wasn't very pleasant at all. And there were moments where, you're not just rehabilitating from the injury, you're psychologically trying to deal with this as well. My 3 favourite things are eating, driving and dancing. You can't do those 3 things very well if you're injured. And I needed a lot of mental strength to get through that injury. But I did it, and as soon as I was better, I wanted nothing more than to go motor racing. Yeah, just get back in the car, but I'll do the driving. But it has kind of given me a bit of inspiration to help other people as well. So I give up some of my time to talk to students. I also do quite a lot of work with our rehabilitating troops. So I've taken them out in cars on circuit. I used to have a Mazda RX-8 as my track day car because obviously having a race car is not enough. And I used to do winter track days, and I took some of the rehabilitating troops out. I've also brought them along to race weekends, got them out in a safety car, got them into race controls so that they can see what the officials can see. And I'm supporting one troop at the moment. He's lost both of his limbs, he's got an injured hand as well, and he's lost part of his sight. And our challenge is to try and get him behind the wheel. So I'm going to be giving him instructions, and he's going to hopefully do what I tell him to do. So it's going to be a big mountain to climb, but I think it'll be really helpful for his rehabilitation.